I stood on the sand with my bare feet and looked out at the Pacific Ocean. The setting sun turned Playa Hermosa golden. Even the palm trees behind me had a golden hue. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about how I got here. As the Grateful Dead song says, what a long, strange ride it's been. 6 months ago. Renee, Mary Margaret, two stylishly dressed young women squealed and rushed to hug each other as the restaurant owner watched them with amusement. When they finished greeting each other, she led them to a table at the back of the cafe. Although it was still May, the temperature in Houston had already risen to 27 degrees, and the corresponding humidity made air conditioning a must. I wonder how many hours you need to spend in the gym to achieve a figure like theirs. The hostess thought with envy, seating her visitors. I was so glad you called Mary Margaret, the shorter blonde purred. It's been an eternity since you came here. I know, the tall brunette answered. Creating my own advertising agency took much longer than I could have imagined. To be honest, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't called a potential client. But since it happened, I couldn't pass up the chance to see my old college roommate. Yes, and I couldn't miss the opportunity to see my bridesmaid again. It's been too long, friend. The waiter interrupted them with 2 glasses of white wine, and after he took their orders for lunch, Mary Margaret tilted her head. Well, how do you like the profession of a lawyer? A wide smile appeared on Renee's face. Amazing. Baker, Norton and Vinson is the biggest law firm in town. I get a great salary, plus a huge bonus for last year, and I have a good shot at becoming a partner. Wow, I thought I was doing well. Sorry, I didn't mean to brag. But what about you? How are things going at your agency? The brunette smiled coyly. Well, while we're bragging here, my little agency is the hottest creative business in Dallas. In fact, she said in a low voice, last night I signed a contract for all the advertising for the southwest region of one of the major oil companies. Our bills for them next year will be in the millions. Renee nodded approvingly. I always knew you would become a star, girl. They ate their salads in silence for a few minutes. Then Renee looked at her friend curiously. You didn't say anything about romance. How is your personal life? Mary Margaret sighed. To be honest, there's not much to talk about. The dating scene is getting quite tiresome. These dating services are useless. I'd have better luck finding a unicorn than someone like your handsome husband. She noticed how Renee's gaze darted to the side for a moment. Hey, what's going on, neighbor? Are you having problems with your hubby? Now the blonde clearly felt uncomfortable. She sighed, took a sip from her glass of wine, and then looked up at her friend. I really want to tell someone, Mary Margaret, but you have to promise that it will be strictly confidential. Certainly. Now tell me what's going on. Renee took a deep breath and then blurted out in a low whisper. I'm having an affair. Is it true? I'm shocked. I thought you and Robert were the perfect couple. She leaned closer. What's happened? Renee shook her head dismissively. It's just, to be honest, she shrugged. Robert has turned into a real disappointment. Why? Mary Margaret leaned back in her chair, surprised by the harshness of her friend's statement. Remember when I told you about the deal Robert made to become the general counsel of his old company and how it fell through? This was quite annoying, but now he decided to put up his sign and start practicing on his own. Her friend frowned. If he loves the law so much, why doesn't he take it up? To me, this is a pretty bold step. You wouldn't say that if you saw him. He's pathetic. He works in a tiny office. He rents in a rundown shopping center. He barely writes enough hours to cover his expenses, let alone bring anything home. I am the one who supports us. Mary Margaret raised one eyebrow. I seem to remember him doing the same thing for you when you graduated from law school. Renee shook her head impatiently. Yes, but it was different. I knew that I would succeed as soon as I finished school, and I did. She frowned. But Robert just bangs his head against the wall. His law office is no different from all the other scammers who chase ambulances to attract business. The truth is, I feel awkward every time someone from my firm or anyone else, for that matter, asks me about him. She stared into the distance. I used to think that together we would go far and really achieve something in life. But to be honest, I left him behind, and he will never catch up with me. She sighed. I've outgrown it, Mary Margaret. It's time to move on. Mary Margaret sat in silence, digesting her lunch and her friend's revelation. A few minutes later, she took another sip of wine and looked questioningly at her friend. So who is this other man in your life? Renee leaned forward and whispered. This is my boss at Baker, Norton. He's already a partner, and the talk in the hallways is that he's going to be senior partner when old Baker retires. It looks like you are aiming for a high level. How long does this affair last? I think about 6 months. But listen, it's not just about sex. He's crazy about me. He wants to marry me as soon as he can leave his wife. So you both have an inconvenient spouse. Yes, but Vance has a prenuptial agreement, so leaving the marriage won't be too costly for him. What about you and Robert? Are you going to divorce him? Renee's face is saddened. That's the problem. We didn't even think about a marriage contract. As things stand now, if we break up, I'll probably end up paying alimony to Robert, and I won't stand for that. I don't intend to finance his pathetic law office for the rest of my life. Mary Margaret shook her head. You know you're playing a dangerous game, friend. Texas is not a no-fault state. If he catches you in bed, he will most likely charge you for much more than just alimony. Renee looked at her friend in despair. Refresh my memory. Which of us has a legal education? Then she smiled to ease the sarcasm. In any case, I'll think of something. 3 weeks later. Unfortunately, I learned about the conversation with my wife much later, too late to do anything about it. All I knew for sure that May morning was that neither my personal nor my professional life was turning out the way I had planned. I was in a gloomy mood as I pulled into the small shopping center and parked my car in one of the allotted curbside spots. As I was closing the car door, I noticed a sign for rent on the window of one of the shops at the other end of the center. Isn't that where that little craft and candle shop was located? Damn, it looks like they didn't have time. I shook my head, hoping that a similar fate would not befall my legal practice. Walking up to the door to my office, I ran my fingers along the sign pinned to the wall. Robert L. Wilson, Esq. A lawyer. The plate was plastic, but looked a little like bronze. Maybe someday I'll make one like this, engraved on marble. Everything was quiet inside, but it was 7 in the morning, so what did I expect? I have always had the habit of coming to work early. There is no reason to change it now. I checked my phone, but none of the potential clients had left messages. He sighed and sank into a chair. Reaching into my desk drawer, I pulled out a folder containing documents related to a contract I was preparing for a client. It was pretty simple, but there was no reason not to test it again just to be sure. I have time, that's for sure. However, after a few minutes, I threw the pen on the table and leaned back in my chair with a sigh. If only the Allies were doing well. I worked as an operations manager for Allied Fluid Dynamics, a large regional supplier of oil and gas pipeline components. Everything was fine with me. I earned good money and was in line for a promotion. Then Ben Masterson, the company's president, called me into his office with an interesting proposal. Phil Larson came to see me yesterday. He wanted to warn me in advance that he planned to retire in a few years and that Allied would need to find a new general counsel. I haven't heard this news. Phil was a little old school in his dress and manners, but he kept the company's legal affairs up to date, not always an easy task in the rough and tumble oil industry. We weren't close, but I respected him. Ben couldn't stand it. Phil also had some advice for me. He told me that we have 3 options to replace it. The first is to outsource everything to transfer all our legal work to some external law firm. If we did that, he told me, it would cost us a fortune, and it would take them at least 2 or 3 years to learn the business well enough to become effective. The second option he suggested was to hire some smart lawyer and teach him the business. This will not be easy to do, and again, there will be a long learning curve. Finally, Phil said, We can find someone on staff who knows our business inside and out and send him to law school. I nodded. You know, Ben, the last option really makes sense. Our business is quite unique. I'm willing to bet it would take less time to learn the law, or at least the areas we need, than it would to understand the ins and outs of this crazy industry. Ben chuckled. I was hoping you would say that, because the guy Phil recommended was you. I'm an operations manager. I could never do what Phil does. Phil thinks differently. He told me he thought you were perfect and said you had an inclination for the law. Ben must have read my expression because he stopped me before I could protest. Of course, the company will pay for all training and expenses for your education. We'd like you to take classes in the evenings and handle the operations. It won't be easy, but if you can do it, you'll be entering a senior management role at a much younger age than might otherwise be expected. What do you say? I think I should punch Phil Larson in the face. I laughed back. Seriously, Ben, this is not something I ever even thought about. Regardless, I need to go home and discuss this with my wife. He couldn't argue with that, so I went home and told Renee about the opportunity. To my surprise, she was all for it. That's great, honey. She was delighted. You'll go from that boring middle manager job straight to the CEO's office. And if they put you on the board like Phil, you might get some big stock options. Perhaps, but it would take me far outside my comfort zone. The thought of going back to school is quite scary. Oh, don't worry about it. You're smart enough to handle the coursework. Plus, you'll only have to focus on contracts and regulations, definitely no criminal law. Anyway, I just went through all this stuff, so I can help you if you get stuck. Come on, honey, this is the chance of a lifetime. You have to do it, okay? If you're ready, then so am I. Amazing, she squealed. My friends will be so jealous. This is how I started my legal career. When I enrolled in the University of Houston Law Center's correspondence program, I learned that I would be studying year-round for 4 years. I will take classes in the evenings, taking 10 credits a semester, while continuing to work at Allied. In addition, Masterson told me I would have to find and train a successor to take over my job. It was a killer workload, and several times I questioned my sanity. Too often I made do with little sleep and a lot of coffee. To make matters worse, I had almost no time to spend with Renee. As it turns out, this was bound to happen anyway. After graduating from law school, Renee was hired by Baker, Norton, and Vinson, the largest law firm in Houston. She now worked the same number of hours a week as I did, including my studies. There were weeks when we only saw each other for a couple of hours. But every time we saw each other, we agreed that the pain and separation would be worth it in the end. Despite my doubts and occasional bouts of burnout, I made it through, and the pride I felt on graduation day was proof that I made the right decision. Of course, there was still one more obstacle, the bar exam. So on the Monday after graduation, I was back in class, preparing for a grueling 12-hour exam over 2 days. 3 months later, when I saw my name on the exam list, I was overjoyed. When Ben Masterson called me into his office the following Monday, I was energized and ready to begin my new responsibilities. However, despite my excitement, I couldn't help but notice the smiling expression on Ben's face as I sat down in front of his desk. "Robert," he said grimly, "I don't know any other way to deal with this except to tell you straight." Over the weekend, the board of directors met and voted to accept Kinder Morgan's offer to purchase us. They want to move forward with the takeover immediately, so that next week, Allied will become their wholly owned subsidiary. I was stunned. I had not even heard a whisper about such a possibility. What does this mean for all of us? I'm going to retire like most other directors. By next week, KM will have a new management team taking over day-to-day operations. I grabbed the edge of his desk to steady myself. How will this affect my role? He couldn't look me in the eye. I'm very sorry, Robert. Kinder Morgan subsidiaries do not have their own legal counsel. So I'm fired. He winced. No, of course not. The general counsel position is becoming redundant, but you will have the opportunity to return to the operations manager position. Of course, you'll have to let young Stearns go. I thought about the clear-eyed engineer whom I was grooming as my successor. And she just got married. I can't do this, Ben, not after the last 4 years. Keep Stearns and let me go. I thought you would say that, Robert. He shook his head sadly. This merger will be good for the company and many of our people, but not for everyone. I'm really sorry. He stood up to let me know that the meeting was over. If you go to the HR department, they will help you make all the preparations. He extended his hand, and I reluctantly shook it. I'm really sorry, Robert. This is not what I imagined when we set out on this path 4 years ago. And just like that, I became unemployed. They gave me 6 months severance and benefits, but that was rather cold comfort when I thought about my high expectations. Renee was shocked when I told her the news. How could they do this to you, especially after all those extra hours you worked at their request? This is simply wrong, I agreed, but there was nothing I could say to make her or myself feel better. It was just business, and I was just collateral damage. Are you going to start looking for a job in the oil industry? She asked. You still have a lot of contacts there, don't you? Not anymore. I got so caught up in law school that I lost touch with many of my old colleagues. Also, the price of crude oil has dropped a lot this year, so there aren't that many employees to hire. Then what are you going to do? I didn't spend the last 4 years of my life going to law school just to throw it away. I'm going to start looking for legal work. Don't be stupid, dear. Baker, Norton won't hire you, they only hire newbies. It's the same in other large companies. If you don't have specialized legal knowledge or big clients that you can bring with you, your chances of getting a job at one of them are pretty slim. Then, if I have to, I'll open my own company, I said stubbornly. She left the conversation, probably hoping that I would give up the idea when I had a chance to think it over. But 2 weeks later, when she learned that I had used my severance pay to sign a lease for office space in a shopping center, she became openly negative. This place is a disgrace, Robert. Working at this address, you will never develop a respectable clientele. Just look at me, I swore. Looking back, I think that's when our marriage really started to go downhill. Renee tried to hide her displeasure at my whimsical plan, but she openly resented the fact that she was responsible for a large share of our living expenses. I didn't like it either, but I couldn't convince her that the situation was temporary. Moreover, she was clearly embarrassed when friends and colleagues asked about my endeavor. She spoke about it only in general terms and quickly tried to change the subject. It practically took a subpoena to get her to tell me the address of my new office. Our friends sympathized, but it was easy to hear reservations in their voices. As a result, I retreated even further to avoid the inevitable questions, how's practice going? Renee's star, on the contrary, continued to grow. She billed more and more by the hour, and in the process, attracting large clients. Whenever we met people from Baker, Norton, all they would talk about was how well Renee was doing and how good her prospects were for the partnership. This meant we were under no monetary pressure despite the loss of my income. On the other hand, her success coupled with her resentment towards me led to her spending more and more time in the office. This was the state of affairs at the end of May when Hurricane Matty hit. I was looking through one of my few active cases when I heard the front door open. I hurried out of the office and saw a young, well-dressed African-American woman. She looked to be about 20 years old, and the jacket and skirt she wore showed off her slender, athletic figure. I remember wondering if she was an athletics athlete in college. But the most remarkable thing about her was her hair. She wore them long and natural, and they hung below her shoulders, framing her beautiful, caramel-colored face in an ebony flow. Please let her be a paying customer, I thought, introducing myself and leading her into my Spartan office. When we sat down, I put on my most professional expression. So how can I help you today, miss? She quickly reached across the table to shake my hand, her face breaking into a smile that seemed to raise the light level in the room. I'm Madison Armstrong, but everyone calls me Maddie. I'm not looking for your help, I'm here to help you. Before I could answer, she took the folder of documents she had brought with her and placed it on the table. I just finished my first year at the University of Houston Law Center with top marks, as you will see. Now I'm ready to spend the summer as your legal intern. This was not what I expected. To give myself some time before letting her down, I opened her folder and looked through it. She did well. Honor Society in undergrad, high LSAT scores, top 10% of her law class her freshman year. Then I realized something was wrong. Isn't it a bit late for you to start looking for an internship? And with scores like these, shouldn't you interview at one of the big law firms downtown? Her radiant smile faded for a moment. You are, of course, right. To be honest, I had an internship lined up at Baker, Norton, and Vinson, but just last week they emailed me and said there was a mix-up and they didn't have a spot for me. I bet one of the partners met her and changed his mind. I shook my head sympathetically. I know a little about this company. I guess you could say they're a little monochromatic. Her wide smile returned. Well, their loss is your gain. Besides, I'd rather get real-world work experience than spend the summer delivering lattes and filling out paperwork. I want to work with real people with everyday problems, the kind you probably face all the time. I couldn't help but admire her courage, but I knew I had no choice. I'm sorry, Miss Armstrong, but I can't hire you. Anger flashed in her eyes, and I hastened to continue. No, it's not what you thought. Look, I would really like to have someone with your knowledge and your attitude to help me here. But look around you. It's obvious that I'm barely keeping my head above water. There is no way I can pay you, not even an intern's salary. I'm really sorry. She looked at me intently for a moment, then her smile shone brighter than ever. Then it's decided. I will work for free. I just stretch your student loans to cover living expenses over the summer. She winked at me. Besides, I really like ramen noodles. Wait, I can't do this. I would use you to my advantage. It wouldn't be fair. A determined expression appeared on her face. You cannot take advantage of me if I know in advance what you are offering and agree to it. Besides, and now there was a pleading look in her eyes, I really need experience and credentials. And Dr. Goldstein said you were a good guy I could learn from. I remembered Goldstein. I took his torrent class, and he was strict with me. And I was surprised that he even remembered, much less recommended me. I hope I don't regret it. I stood up and extended my hand to her. Okay, Miss Armstrong, you are my new summer intern. She squeaked slightly and jumped up to shake my hand. Thank you, Squire. You won't regret it. I shook my head when she called me Squire, and then laughed when I realized it. You must have misread my street sign. My name is Wilson, Robert Wilson. Esquire is simply an old-fashioned term for lawyer. Oh, I know that, she laughed. When I was growing up, my father was a lawyer in our small town, and everyone called him Squire. I think it just stuck with me. Well, I'm Robert, or Mr. Bitchy Wilson if we have a client. Now, I led her out of my office. You can sit over there, but I'm afraid I don't have a table or chair for you. She looked around, not paying attention. No problem. Is it okay if I use your network connection? I have a laptop in my car. When I nodded, she ran out the door and returned a minute later. Sitting down in the chair that served as a reception area, she began to busily work with a keyboard and mouse. While I was playing around, she quickly finished what she was doing, took some notes on her cell phone, and then looked up at me. Is it okay if I start in just an hour? I chuckled. What will I do? Deduct it from your salary. She laughed and hurried out the door. An hour and a half passed before she returned. I heard the sound of a heavy engine outside and went to the door to see what was going on. She was just jumping out of the cab of a large F-150. Seeing me looking, she waved her hand and invited me to come over. This is my brother's truck, Squire. He let me borrow it. I started to correct her, but I was so curious that I decided it could wait. She led me to the back of the pickup truck, and when she opened the back door, I saw a beautiful office desk. Where did you buy it? On Craigslist, she replied. Seeing my face, she hurried on. Don't worry, it was free. A company was going out of business and offering its furniture to anyone who would take it. I also took a chair. Can you help me bring them in? The table wasn't very big, but I was still amazed at how easily Maddie handled her part of the load. Definitely an athlete, I decided. While she went to get her brother, I went back inside and stood there, confused about what had just happened. Definitely not how I expected my morning to go, I said to the new office furniture. 45 minutes later, she burst into the office. I'm back, Squire. Now we can begin. And before I could remember to correct her about my name, Hurricane Maddie unleashed the winds of change in my life. By the end of the first week, she had completely reorganized my document filing system. It was very good because I didn't really have any system. Since there were so few clients, I began to lay out folders in any free space. When Maddie realized what I was doing, she didn't say anything. But the next day, I found a new filing cabinet in my office with all my clients alphabetized and neatly stacked. Free via Craig's Craigslist, she confirmed my unasked question. Next was my schedule. Soon she was syncing the calendar on my computer, my phone, and her computer. If we ever get tons of clients, I thought sarcastically, Maddie will make sure we never miss a meeting. She then connected it all to my billing system. Organization was not her only talent. She also happens to be a research wizard, combing through statutes, discovering precedents, looking for little things that might help our clients' cases. I was always proud of my abilities, but she made me feel ashamed. Once she became comfortable with how we operated, Maddie focused her attention on our clients and their needs. She wanted to know everything about them, and I was happy to give her their files to review and point out the relevant laws. After she digested their problems, she would come to my office with questions. She was especially interested in why I handled their case the way I did. Now I began to feel like I was giving her something valuable, an education about how a lawyer approaches a case. She quickly realized that legal practice in the real world is not as simple and straightforward as taught in school. When we weren't dealing with a client, she would bring her law books, and we would discuss cases. I was impressed by how much case law she had already absorbed, and I think she was impressed by the way I analyzed the issues. I enjoyed our classes, and the days went by much faster. I told Renee about Maddie early on, and she was amused by the idea. One day, she came into my office, and I introduced her to Maddie. Renee had a hard time hiding her amusement when she heard Maddie call me Squire. That evening at home, Renee couldn't stop teasing me about my assistant. I told her about Maddie's grades and her LSAT scores, but Renee wasn't impressed. This irritated me. She would have been an intern at your firm if Baker Norton had not refused their offer, I said. It's good that we refused, she grinned. I can imagine what a commotion she would cause, walking through the corridors with such a shock of hair. Well, I think it suits her, and I can tell there's a bright mind hiding under that hair. As far as I'm concerned, the loss of Baker Norton is my luck. Renee rolled her eyes and changed the subject. As the Houston summer unfolded, with ever-increasing temperatures and humidity, life grew colder for the Wilson household. Whereas Renee had previously been impatient with me and my efforts to start my own law practice, she was now indifferent. When I tried to tell her about a new client or a funny anecdote about Maddie, she clearly wasn't paying attention. Whenever I suggested going out for drinks and dinner, she always had work to do. By the end of July, we saw each other very rarely. Our sex life was just a memory. The situation became so tense that one day, when Maddie asked me another question about the procedure, I lashed out at her. Her head jerked back as if I had slapped her in the face, and she silently stood up and left the office. I sat there for a minute, letting my anger boil over. Then I went out and sat next to her desk. "Can I talk to you for a minute, Maddie?" I asked, trying to get her attention. She didn't look at me. "Of course you can. You're the boss." "Maddie, I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong by asking these questions. In fact, I'm glad you're so eager to learn. The truth is that the problem is me." I sighed and my shoulders sagged. "I can tell you. Renee and I are going through a rough patch, and I guess I'm taking it out on you. I'm sorry." She looked at me with concern. What's going on, Squire? I started telling her the whole story about Renee's disappointment in me and how our relationship had cooled. Perhaps it's my fault. I was so stubborn in my desire to succeed as a lawyer that I ignored the obvious. I was simply not good enough to make it work. No, she said sharply. You had a goal, and you decided to achieve it. I don't know how this will turn out, but I do know that you are a damn good lawyer. I've already learned a lot from you. I appreciate your loyalty, Maddie, but I'm sure Renee doesn't share that opinion. She looked at me appraisingly. It looks like things aren't going very well in the romance department either. I smiled wryly at her. The only way to see romance these days is to turn on the Hallmark channel. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Everything will be fine, Squire. I'm just sure that it will happen. Then she realized what she had done and pulled her hand back. I had to smile. Thanks for the pep talk, Maddie. Now I better get back to Carlson's suit. So we parted. I tried not to bring my home life into the office anymore, and Maddie tried not to bring up anything personal. We both knew what the other was doing. This continued until the beginning of August. Late one morning, I was working at my desk when I heard the front door ring. Maddie, who, among other things, had taken on the role of secretary, went to see who was there. A minute later, she stood at the door of my office with a strange expression on her face. Squire, you have a visitor. She says it's a personal matter. As I stood up to greet the visitor, Renee's former college roommate walked through the door. Mary Margaret, I haven't seen you for 100 years. How are you? Are you still in Dallas? Still working in Dallas, but I came here for the day. My meeting ended earlier than expected, and I thought I'd take a chance and see if you could have lunch. I pretended to look at my schedule. Of course, that would be great. Do you want me to try to get Renee to join us? Actually, I saw her last time I was here. I thought that this time I would try to do the same with you. Oh, good. Well, in that case, let's do it. I took her to the reception area. I would like to introduce you to Madison Armstrong, who is interning with me this summer. Maddie, meet Mary Margaret Olson, an old friend of Renee and me. We're going to go have lunch. Can you look after everything while I'm gone? Of course, Squire, she said, and extended her hand to Mary Margaret. Nice to meet you, Miss Olson. She then returned to her desk. As Mary Margaret and I walked out the door, something seemed strange to me. Maddie wasn't smiling, I realized. At that moment, Mary Margaret grabbed my hand and giggled. What is this, Squire, Robert? I rolled my eyes. It's just Maddie. It's a long story. Mary Margaret took me to a charming little bistro a little further than I expected, but the food was worth the drive. Over lunch and a couple glasses of wine, we learned about each other's lives and reminisced about old college friends. The conversation was pleasant, but I couldn't help but feel a little awkward. We were friends, but Mary Margaret was much closer to Renee than I was. My discomfort intensified when the waiter cleared our plates and Mary Margaret looked deeply into my eyes. So, how are things going with you and Renee now? Great. Everything is fine. Why do you ask? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, nothing special. Renee just mentioned that starting your company takes all your energy. And as I understand it, her own workload has also increased. I'm just worried about you guys. What did Renee tell her about us? It's been a little stressful at times, but we'll get through it. She smiled slightly. You know, when you and Renee first started dating, I was very impressed with you. At the time, I thought she was doing a great job, and I still think so. I hope she never forgets this. I sat in silence, not knowing what to answer. It felt like something else was going on, but I couldn't figure out what it was. We drove back to my office, having a pleasant chat. But before I could get out of the car, she reached out and squeezed my hand. You are very dear to me, Robert. Please stay in touch. And if you want to talk, you know how to contact me. With these words, she leaned over and quickly kissed me on the cheek. I waved goodbye and walked into the office where I ran into Maddie. Well, how was lunch? She asked indifferently. All was good. It was nice to be able to connect with each other and talk about college. In 2 hours, I quickly glanced at my watch and was amazed. It seems time has escaped me. Maddie looked at me strangely. Be careful with her. She has hungry eyes. Don't be stupid, Maddie. She's Renee's best friend. She's not interested in me. I'm just saying, Squire. She then returned to her desk, and I did the same. But it took me some time to focus on work. What a strange conversation. Was she really hitting on me? And if so, why now? How strange. In the end, I decided to tell Renee about our dinner so she wouldn't think I was hiding something from her. But that evening, she was late for a meeting at work, and by the time she got home, I had given up and gone to bed. In my irritation, I forgot to tell her about my dinner guest. If I had been irritated before, by the following week I had become downright pessimistic about the prospects of my marriage. I was hoping that we could do something together, but Renee was busy on both Saturday and Sunday. On Monday, she called me in the morning with even more discouraging news. We have just begun negotiations on a major acquisition for one client. I can't tell you who's involved, but I guarantee you'll read about it in the Wall Street Journal when it's done. In any case, the negotiations are taking place at the Alessandra Hotel, and since we will probably be working around the clock to meet the deadline, the company has reserved a block of rooms for us. As a result, I most likely won't be able to be home much this week. The way things have been going lately, I probably wouldn't even notice, I thought bitterly, but did not tell her about it. That evening I worked late, then went and treated myself to dinner at a nice restaurant. I hoped Renee would be there when I got home at 11 Uzo, but she wasn't and didn't arrive by the time I got up the next morning. I might as well take off my wedding ring, I thought angrily while driving to the office. I'm single in all but name. However, I tried not to let my anger affect the way I behaved towards Maddie. Late that evening, I heard the front door ring, and a minute later, Maddie appeared on the threshold of my office. You have a new client, Squire, she announced, eyes wide. What came over her? When I stood up to greet my visitor, I understood everything. Maddie brought one of the most attractive women I've ever seen in real life. She had the cheekbones of a model, highlighted by long blonde hair that was tucked behind one ear and flowing down the other side of her face. The blouse and jacket she wore did nothing to hide her well-developed bust, and the pencil skirt was short enough to show off her long, slender legs. She could be a supermodel, I thought, and judging by the expression on Maddie's face, she was shocked too. As I stood there, clicking my tongue, the woman confidently stepped forward and shook my hand. Mr. Wilson, I'm Amber Thompson. I apologize for barging in on you, but I have very little time. In a nutshell, I intend to divorce my husband and want to hire you as my lawyer. With that, she reached into the patent leather purse she carried with her and pulled out a receipt. Here's $2,000 as an advance. If this is not enough, just let me know and I will be happy to adjust the amount. No, that's quite satisfactory, Mrs. Thompson. Why don't you sit down so we can discuss the details of your situation? I managed to say, gesturing towards the chair. She smiled and shook her head. I have to apologize again, but I don't have time for that today. All I wanted today was to make sure that you don't refuse your services. If your schedule allows, I would like to meet with you at this time tomorrow to discuss my case with you. I pretended to check my calendar, but knew that whenever this goddess wanted to meet, I would do my best to satisfy her. Tomorrow afternoon, everything will be fine, I assured her. This is wonderful, she sighed. I look forward to working with you. She then turned and walked out of my office, but not before I noted that her figure was just as attractive from the back as it was from the front. After Amber left, Maddie came in and stared at me. So I guess she had to rush back to Victoria's Secret to finish the photo shoot, huh? I didn't mean to say anything that would offend Maddie. I don't know about it, but she was definitely head and shoulders above most of our clients, I replied. Maddie laughed a little and walked back to her desk, but not before stopping and giving me a long look. I didn't want to admit it to Maddie, but I was really hooked on Amber. I've met attractive women before, but none of them compared to Amber. That evening, I returned home and had dinner leftover food and then settled down in front of the TV. I was browsing through the channels when I came across one of the movies. The next morning, I got up and showered, then spent extra time getting ready and choosing the best suit and tie. I suddenly realized I was humming as I drove to work and shook my head in disgust. You're acting like a teenager on a date. You're a married man and Amber is a client. Get a grip, Wilson. But the memory of Amber standing in the doorway did not go away, and my subconscious continued to whisper that my wife was sitting comfortably aside. Trouble, trouble, my conscience warned. The day was busy enough to keep my attention, but as our meeting time approached, I found myself checking the clock on my phone frequently. When 3:30 finally struck and Amber didn't show up, I was filled with disappointment. 15 minutes later, I stood up to look outside, but Amber was still not there. When I returned, Maddie grinned at me, but didn't say anything. At that moment, my phone rang, and when I answered, I heard Amber's melodious voice. Robert, it looks like all I'm doing is apologizing to you. I'm late at work. Any chance you could meet me somewhere nearby? Of course I can do it. Where would you like to meet? Do you happen to like jazz? There's this place I love called Downbeat, where we can drink and talk. I was pleasantly surprised. I love jazz, and the Downbeat is my favorite place in Houston. I'll be there in an hour. Great, then I'll see you there. I was cleaning out my desk when Maddie walked in. So you have a date, Squire? I frowned at her. I have a meeting with a client, not a date. Did you eavesdrop on our conversation? She folded her hands. It's pretty hard not to listen when you're talking so loudly. Listen, she was just stuck at work and couldn't get out. We're going to meet somewhere near her office and talk about her case. She nodded. Then her face took on an expression that I couldn't read. Just be careful, Squire. I promise, Maddie, I assured her, heading towards the door. Downbeat is located in an upscale Houston neighborhood filled with small shops, bars, and eateries. It's almost always crowded, but I was lucky that I pulled into the parking lot just as someone was leaving. I walked up the stairs to the club and looked around for Amber. She stood at a table at the back of the room and waved to me. As I hurried over, she took my hands and leaned over to kiss me on the cheek. The scent of her perfume reached me, but I did not recognize it. I hope you don't mind meeting here. I thought we could talk and listen to music at the same time. No, this is wonderful, such a welcome change compared to my small office. We ordered cocktails, and I asked her to tell me about her business. She moved her chair closer to mine and tilted her head toward me, so as not to disturb others. I sniffed her perfume again. It was ghostly, but not too strong. The divorce she sought was very simple. We met in high school, dated exclusively in college, and got married young. But gradually we moved away from each other. We developed different tastes, opinions, and interests. Irreconcilable differences is how we can describe what happened to us. Therefore, we decided to do the civilized thing and divorce on amicable terms. Basically, we agreed on the division of property. All I need now is someone in my corner to make sure I'm not missing anything and to help me through this process. If only everyone treated this so maturely. Of course I can do it. Thank you, she sighed in my ear. Now, if we're going to work together, I'd like to know a little about you well as a person. This wasn't a request I'd usually get from a client, but I didn't mind telling her a little about myself. We started exchanging bits of our stories, some details about the who, what, when, where, and why of our lives. While we were doing this, the waitress brought out another portion and appetizers, and then two amazing things happened. First, Amber was a good listener, drawing me out and showing real interest in what I shared. Secondly, when she started talking about herself, I was surprised to discover how much we had in common. We loved the same music, went to the same concerts, watched the same films, and preferred the same cuisine. It was almost supernatural. As we started our third round of cocktails, I thought that we seemed to be made for each other. Renee's face flashed through my mind, and I felt a pang of guilt. Then I remembered how tense things had become between us and how she practically left me this week. I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm just enjoying the company of a new friend, I reasoned. We talked long enough for the fourth cocktail to arrive and be emptied. While the group was taking a break, Amber leaned over and said, "I need to run to the ladies' room. Please wait, I'll be back soon." When she returned, I realized I needed to relieve the pressure on my bladder, so I walked away. Standing in front of the urinal, all I could think about was how beautiful and charming my new client was. When he finished, he washed his hands and then carefully checked his appearance in the mirror. At our table, another portion was waiting. Before I could say anything, she smiled and said, "After that, it's time for me to go." I really didn't want the evening to end, so I settled down next to her and raised my glass, intending to sip my drink as long as possible. The group returned, and while we were sipping cocktails, she leaned over to me and said, "I just love this number." Indeed, the little trio improvised on a classic Miles Davis composition, one of my favorites. I smiled in appreciation, and we sat, almost touching each other, enjoying the music. After a minute or two, she laid her head on my shoulder, and the scent of her perfume reached me again. The moment seemed magical. The applause of the other customers startled me, and I instinctively stood up when the lights came on. Amber was standing right in front of me. "I came here by Uber. Could you give me a ride home?" "Of course," I answered without hesitation. "With pleasure." "Lead me," she said, and I took her hand and led her to the parking lot and my car. I held the door for her, and she slid into the bucket seat. As I pulled into the street, she leaned over and took my hand, giving me directions to her apartment. When I parked on the side of the road in front of her house, she gave me a meaningful look and sighed. "If you will come up with me, I can give you a copy of the proposed separation agreement." I could only nod. The thought of being alone with her in her apartment drove all rational thoughts out of my head. Once inside the apartment, she led me to the sitting area. Her cell phone is quite screeched. She glanced at the message, typed a quick reply, and then smiled at me. "Let me turn off the sound so we don't get disturbed." Putting her phone and purse on the coffee table, she smiled at me with such a promising smile that it took my breath away. "Give me a second, I'll go back to the bedroom to freshen up my clothes." As she disappeared down the hallway, I looked around her apartment. Everything was in its place. Looks like a furniture showroom. Suddenly, I was startled by a sound coming from the wooden coffee table, and I realized that her mobile phone was vibrating with another message. I picked it up to put it on something quieter and was surprised when the screen lit up. It showed a conversation that Amber had apparently been having with someone all evening. "Is he already there?" "Just came." "X in the drink?" "Done." "Don't forget the video." "Okay." My foggy brain had a hard time interpreting the cryptic messages, but then I noticed something that triggered an alarm that I couldn't ignore. There was no name attached to the messages, just a phone number that I knew by heart. Renee. Why is Renee texting Amber? What the hell is going on? I couldn't put it all together, but suddenly I felt an overwhelming desire to get out of there. Quickly tearing out a page from the Architectural Digest that was lying on the coffee table, I scribbled a note in the margin. "Sorry, I have to leave. Just got an alarm from my office. Call me tomorrow. Robert." After that, I rushed to the door and left as quietly as possible. Back in the car, I pulled away from the side of the road and drove as fast as I could. What does all of this mean? How does Renee know Amber? How did she know we were meeting tonight? What did these messages mean? Due to my alcohol-fueled mind and panic, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going, so I was surprised to find that I drove to my office on autopilot. Not knowing what else to do, I staggered to the door and went inside. I sat down on the sofa that Maddie found for us on Craig's Craigslist and put his head in his hands, trying to stop the room from spinning. Finally, I gave up and went to rest. "Squire, wake up. Are you okay? What's happened?" I painfully opened my eyes to see Maddie's worried face looming over me. "Oh God," I groaned, sitting up awkwardly. "What time is it now?" "A little after 7. "Oh shit." Then I looked up at her. "Do you happen to have any aspirin?" She hurried to her purse and returned with 2 pills and a mug of coffee. I put the aspirin in my mouth and took a long sip of coffee and screamed. "Oh, how hot." "Okay," she said, placing her hands on her hips. "Maybe this will help you sober up." I shook my head, which made it even more painful. "I drank a lot last night, but I don't think that's all. I think I may have been drugged with illegal substances." She pulled her chair over to the table across from me and sat down with a worried look on her face. "What happened, Squire? Tell me everything, and we'll try to figure it out." I began to describe the events of the night, omitting details such as the temptation I felt. However, it must have been obvious to Maddie because she quipped, "Is this how you usually conduct meetings with clients?" I didn't bother to answer, she knew the answer. As I got to the story of taking Amber to her apartment, Maddie's expression changed to something I couldn't place. "So you slept with her?" she demanded. "No, that's when things got really strange. I thought we had already crossed all boundaries." I ignored her. When Amber returned to her bedroom, her cell phone began to vibrate with a message. I looked at it, and it blew my mind. The message was from Renee. Maddie's eyes widened. "Renee, how is your wife, Renee?" "Exactly. I found out Renee's phone number." This scared me. How does Renee know Amber, and why is she texting her at this hour? What exactly did the message say? There was a whole series of messages, and I can't remember them all. But she was asking Amber about the video. So I became completely paranoid, wrote Amber a note about the break-in at the office, and got out of there. This is the first smart thing I've done all evening. Maddie is good at being snarky. I ignored her again. When I got to my car, it was difficult for me to think. Maybe it was because of all those cocktails, but it felt like there was more to it than that. So I ended up here and collapsed on the sofa, and I still don't understand what happened. Maddie was silent for a moment. Then she leaned forward. "Squire, I think you've been set up." My head was still throbbing. "What do you mean, framed? Was it you who suggested going to the jazz club to meet?" "No, it was Amber's idea." "And it was you who treated her to cocktails?" "Well, no, but I didn't mind." "Nope. And you offered to take her home?" "Well," she asked, but I was glad to do it. In addition, she said that she had a copy of her husband's proposed agreement in her apartment. Right? So basically what you're saying is that she decided where you'll go, how long you'll stay, how much you'll drink, when you'll leave, and ultimately whether you'll return to her apartment. "Oh God," I moaned, holding my forehead. "And those messages that you saw," Renee asked Amber where you were. "No, I do not think so." She just asked, "Is he already there?" "What was the last message you saw? Don't forget about the video." "So what do you think made Amber stay in the bedroom for so long?" "She said she wanted to freshen up her clothes, but I was hoping she would change into something more comfortable." Maddie rolled her eyes. "Listen, Squire, if a woman is that sexy to you, it doesn't take her long to strip down to her panties." I bet she made sure a hidden camera was ready to record what happened next. By this point, my head was already feeling better, but my mood was getting worse. Damn, 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 I bet you're right. Suddenly, it dawned on me. And I bet I know why. Renee was going to use Amber's little shoot to blackmail me. Now it's Maddie's turn to be confused. "But why would Renee blackmail you, Squire? I thought she had all the money." "That's it," I said, and now the pieces were quickly coming together. "She wants to divorce me on the grounds of adultery in order to get rid of the need to share property with me." I shook my head in disgust. "I know things are bad between us, but I never thought she would try to do something as vile as this." "But who is Amber, and how does she fit into all of this?" "Isn't it obvious? She is bait to lure me into a trap." "She was probably hired by Renee." Then I paused. "But if that's the case, then she definitely fooled me. She knew so much about me, and we had so much in common." At that moment, my phone rang, and I recognized the number. "This is Amber," I muttered to Maddie. "Call her here. If we can talk to her, maybe we can figure this all out." I was amused that Maddie wanted to play detective, but I also wanted to know what was going on, so I answered. "Hey, sorry I disappeared last night. I thought my office had been broken into, but it turned out that some drunk accidentally set off the alarm. Listen, I was going to call you. Could you somehow bring the property settlements here this morning? And then, I let my tone deepen. If you're not busy after work, maybe we could meet and continue the wonderful evening we had. Maddie made a face at me, but there was desire and even some relief in Amber's voice. She promised to come to my office before noon. You're not thinking about going on a date with her again, are you? Maddie demanded when I hung up. I chuckled. No, I'm not even that stupid. But if she was still trying to trap me, I wanted to encourage her that she could do it. Maddie nodded, and I noted the slight smile that flickered across her lips. Then she got down to business. Look, while we're waiting for her to show up, why don't we do a little research on Amber Thomas and see what we can find out? We sat side by side at Maddie's computer. First thing, I said, let's check the court records to see if Amber Thomas has filed for divorce. Nothing surprising, there was nothing. With nothing else to do, Maddie did a quick Google search for Amber Thomas, Houston, Texas. We got a little more than 40 results, with a variety of professions from teacher to technician, housewife, etc. This will take time, I muttered. Then I had a brainstorm. Let's check the police records and see if we can find anything. If she really is a woman of easy virtue, maybe she was detained for harassment. It seemed like a good idea, but we didn't find anything that would help us. Maddie shook her head. Amber Thomas is most likely a fictitious name. Then she suddenly perked up. What was the address of her apartment? Maybe we can find out something this way. When I gave her the address, she quickly scanned the tax rolls. It took a while, but then she looked at me with concern. Squire, if I understand correctly, the apartment you took her to was purchased by Baker, Norton, and Vinson 5 years ago. Now this is interesting. Let me try something else, just to be sure, she said, and did a quick search on the law firm. Once on their website, she found a list of employees. There were over 100 names, but they were arranged in alphabetical order. Once again, hit and miss. No Amber Thomas. Maddie sank into a chair and was about to close the window when she suddenly paused. Wait a minute, look at this. Her cursor highlighted Amber Tompkins in accounting. When she clicked on the name, a headshot of Amber Thomas appeared. Damn it, Squire, she works for your wife's company. I shook my head in confusion. They may work at the same law firm, Maddie, but Amber does the back office. She has nothing to do with Renee. Well, at least we know where Renee recruited her. Maybe we can fill in the blanks when Amber arrives. We tried to work a little, but it was difficult to concentrate. At 11 we heard a car drive up to the house. Then Amber burst into my office, looking just as gorgeous as I remembered. But before she could say anything, Maddie walked in behind Amber and I motioned. I don't think you know my legal assistant, Madison Armstrong. Amber was taken aback for a moment, but then, with a wide smile, she extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Miss Armstrong. I'm Amber Thomas. It's nice to meet you too, Amber Tompkins, Maddie said, without a corresponding smile. Amber turned pale and sighed slightly. Then she caught herself. I think you misheard, I'm Amber Thomas. Maddie looked at her. I meant exactly what I said, Amber Tompkins. Amber nervously looked around for help, only to see me standing there with my hands folded and a stern expression on my face. We know who you are, Amber. Now I think it's time to tell us what's going on. Amber looked from me to Maddie and back again, with a stricken expression on her face. Then, to our amazement, she burst into tears and sank into a chair. I never wanted to do this. I told Renee it was a stupid idea, but she didn't listen. She cried a little more, then took a handkerchief from her purse and wiped her eyes. Okay, I'll tell you the whole story. Renee set it all up. She trimmed you at home so that you would be, very receptive to me. She instructed me on what to tell you, your likes and dislikes, anything to make you feel more comfortable with me. And just in case that wasn't enough, she gave me some of the stuff to put in your drink. When I went to the toilet, I said bitterly, Right, Then I made you take me back to the company's guest apartment. I looked at Maddie. That explains why it looked so sterile and lifeless, and turned his gaze to Amber. There was not a single personal item in the room. She nodded dissatisfied. And when you returned to the bedroom, what were you doing? I was wearing a peignoir. She blushed. Renee told me what kind of underwear you like. I bet that wasn't all you did, Maddie interjected. Now Amber couldn't look at us, and I turned on the camera that Renee gave me and made sure it was pointed at the bed. Maddie huffed angrily, but I had other questions. Why, Amber? Why did you and Renee try to set me up like that? Now she looked at me with pleading eyes. She didn't want to talk about it, but I think the answer is pretty obvious. She wants to get out of your marriage so she can date Hofmeister. Many people know they are having an affair. Vance Hofmeister, he's her boss. The firm will never tolerate them having a relationship. She shook her head. Senior management doesn't know. And when they both get divorced, the company won't be able to say anything. All they will do is give her a new boss. I turned to Maddie. We were right. It was a preemptive strike. Get indisputable evidence of my infidelity, and then get a quick, painless divorce, with little or no compensation from me. They say that Renee will soon become a partner, Amber added. If she gets it, she'll start making really big money. She probably doesn't want you to get any of that money. I stared at her. But why you, Amber? How did you get involved in this dirty scam? I can't understand what you'll win. She began to cry again, quietly but bitterly. It's my own stupid fault. When my marriage broke up a couple of years ago, I accumulated a lot of debt. I was gradually paying them off when suddenly my sister got sick and needed money for an operation. She had no property and I had no loans. She didn't look at us. But I had access to an escrow account that I opened for one of the firm's clients. I was desperate, so I withdrew $48,000 to help my sister. I know it was wrong, but what else could I do? Now she looked at me defiantly. Nobody noticed anything, and I began to gradually return the money. I had just finished paying everything off when Renee came to me. She knew everything I had done and demanded my help in exchange for silence. Her resolve evaporated. She needed help with you. I looked at Maddie. The anger on her face disappeared, replaced by compassion. I couldn't help but feel that I felt a little sorry for this woman too. So what do we do now, Squire? I don't know, Maddie. I wish there was some way for us to get back at Renee and her boss, but I have no idea how. Suddenly, Amber brightened. I think I know a way. We both stared at her in surprise. Do you know that they have been negotiating at Alessandra all this week? I know what room we booked for Renee, and there are rumors that they are practically living together. If we could get this webcam into her room, maybe you could get exactly what you need. I brightened for a moment, but then reality set in. That would be great, I said, but we don't have James Bond working for us. How can one of us sneak into a luxury hotel, enter a locked room, install a camera, and get out undetected? Maddie stared at me. I can do it. How? I asked doubtfully. Dress up as a maid. They have access to all rooms. And how are you going to do this? She smiled slightly. My mother works as a maid at Alessandra. I stared at her. I didn't know. Then, an image of Maddie in a maid costume appeared in front of me, and I instinctively recoiled. No, Maddie, you can't do that. You are a law student. It won't look like. I hesitated, not knowing what to say. Besides, it would be too risky. What if Renee catches you? I should be there with the team this afternoon to support them. I can call you to let you know when the meeting ends, Amber said. Maddie folded her hands, and a look of determination appeared on her face. Then it's decided. She looked at me intently. I'll sort it out, Squire. The three of us worked on the details of our plan, a little more, and then set out to put it into action. Maddie went outside to call her mother. After a long conversation that I would have loved to overhear, she returned and nodded. She will help me. All is ready. The three of us got into my car and drove to the B&V apartment that Amber was using. She went inside and soon returned with a camera that seemed surprisingly tiny to me. "Are you sure this will work?" I doubted. "You'll be surprised how good it is," she replied. "And we can connect to it via the internet." Of course, via Wi-Fi at the hotel. From there, we drove downtown to Dallas Street and stopped at the garage next door to Alessandra's. "I hope we can connect my laptop to the internet," I thought as I approached the building. As it turned out, there was no need to worry. The hotel's Wi-Fi signal was so strong that it penetrated outside the building. We were easily able to connect to the network using the password Amber gave us. Then I entered the webcam URL and I was done. While I was setting up the camera, Amber hurried off to meet with the B&V support staff and Maddie left to meet her mother. I was left sitting in the hot car, cell phone at the ready, worrying about everything that could go wrong with our stupid plan. When my phone rang an hour later, it brought me out of my heat-induced stupor. "Robert, this is Amber. The meeting is about to be adjourned. Is the webcam in place? Haven't heard anything from Maddie. I'll call her right now." After disconnecting, I dialed Maddie's number. "The maid just arrived on Renee's floor," she told me. "I'm no we'll slip through to her room." "Hurry up," I urged. "They're probably already on their way there." The phone went off, and I spent the next few minutes anxiously, alternately checking my phone and my laptop. The phone beeped first, a message from Maddie. Almost done, it read. I updated the laptop's connection to the web address Amber had given us, and suddenly I saw Maddie's face looking at me. I almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed in a shapeless gray dress, and her hair was pulled back and covered with a large gray scarf. "Maddie, hurry up," I hissed, and she almost fell. "You scared me," she accused, and then went back to fiddling with the position of the camera. At that moment, I heard the sound of a key opening the door lock, and my wife entered the room. "Oh my God, she's already dated Maddie. She will definitely recognize her." While I was holding my breath, Renee glanced at Maddie and then looked around her. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Maddie curtsied. "Refuse your services, meme." She calmly walked over to the double bed and pulled the covers off one of the pillows. "Do you want one mint or two?" she asked smartly. "No mints," Renee snapped, turning away from her. "Just finish and leave." "Yes, ma'am. Sorry to bother you, meme." With that, Maddie turned, winked at the camera, and then calmly walked out of the room. Luckily, I remembered to turn off the speaker on my laptop because I let out a huge sigh of relief. She didn't recognize Maddie. Apparently, Renee didn't bother to pay attention to my help. At that moment, the passenger door yanked open, scaring me half to death until I saw Amber slip into the car. "Did Maddie make it on time?" she asked. I gestured to the laptop and touched the screen. Renee's room reappeared, but it was empty. Then I noticed that the bathroom door was closed. "Renee must be there," I said. We heard a brisk knock on the room door, and Renee hurried out of the bathroom in the free robe that Alessandra provided. When she opened the door, a man entered the room. "This is Hofmeister," Amber whispered. "Thank God you're finally here," Renee said. "I thought those old dinosaurs would never finish the job." I knew what was going to happen, but it still didn't prepare me for the reality. Renee, the woman I had loved unconditionally for most of our marriage, was about to give herself to another man. I must have made some noise because Amber reached across the console and tapped my arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Suddenly, the back door of my car swung open, startling the two of us. Maddie climbed inside, still dressed in her maid outfit. "I rushed here as fast as I could," she said, breathless. "Did I miss anything?" I gestured towards the laptop, and she leaned back to get a good look at it. "About," she said, and fell silent. I took a deep breath and turned to look at my companions. "Well, I'd say we have proof of infidelity," I said, and when they nodded, I started saving the video file. But before I could do that, Vance's voice came through the speaker. "What about Tompkins? Will this idiot get the job done or what?" Maddie sighed, and I saw the anger on Amber's face. "I talked to Amber during break today," she reassured him. "She told me that she would meet Robert again tonight, and promised that this time she would have her sights set on him. I hope so. You don't think she's chickened out, do you? She has no choice. We caught her embezzling, and she knows it. He nodded. And as soon as we get the video, you'll press him too. She grinned. If he tries to resist, I will threaten to take him to the bar on a disciplinary charge for sleeping with a client. Vance glanced sideways at her. I don't know if you can do this, baby. Didn't the Texas bar vote against sanctions on this matter? Who cares? She grinned. The last thing a solo practitioner needs is a reputation for sleeping with his clients. He will have to leave the city if this becomes known. In any case, the judges here are not very sympathetic to adulterers, so as soon as I file a lawsuit, I can get a quick decision, and in a couple of months, I will be free from it. Then, her expression changed. So what about you? How soon can you leave your prudish little wife? We already talked about this, Renee. I can't do anything while Baker's gone. But I do know that this old fart told the senior partners that he would retire after Christmas. I just have to wait until the new year, then I can also apply. He saw the offended expression on her face and hastened to calm her down. The timing will be perfect, baby. By then, your marriage will be ancient history, and when I apply, we can see each other in public. We'll have a whirlwind romance, and we'll get married in no time, you'll see. Okay, she sighed, but it's so hard to hide like this. I reached out and turned off the web feed. I think we have everything we need, and I feel like that's about all I can handle. My companions looked at me with sympathetic eyes, and for several moments we sat in silence. Then Maddie reached out to squeeze my shoulder again. Squire, I need to go. I have to return the key to the room and this uniform to my mother, and she wants me to stay and have dinner with her tonight. She says I'm ignoring her. Of course, Maddie, I understand. Look, I can't thank you enough for what you did today. You took a big risk, and I shouldn't have let you do it. But if you didn't do this, we wouldn't have a video. You know I'll do anything, Squire. She seemed to be a little out of breath. Anyway, it's time for me to run. With that, she climbed out of the back seat and hurried to the elevator in the parking lot. I turned to Amber. The same goes for you. If you hadn't helped us, I would still be in the dark about Renee's plans. She smiled bitterly and patted my hand. After what I tried to do to you, it was the least I could do. Yes, but it was because you were blackmailed. Maybe so, but in any case, you gave me a chance to make things right. I'm very grateful for this. Then she sat up a little straighter. So, what happens next? I've already thought about this. I want to edit this video and make a copy. Once I do that, I'll have to figure out how to get Baker to watch it. Her smile was as attractive as the first time. I think I can help you with that too. There will be a banquet at the hotel this evening to mark the conclusion of the negotiations. Renee and Vance will be there, of course, and they think I'll, make a deal with you. And tomorrow there will be a morning meeting here to sum up the results, and Baker is going to attend it. She smiled slightly. He is always the last one to speak. Either way, you'll be able to catch him before he gets back to the office. This is perfect, I told her. I want to strike while the iron is hot. I'll have to work late, but it'll be worth it. She pouted sweetly and looked at me from under drooping eyelids. I'm very sorry, Robert. You are a really, really impressive guy. I was hoping to spend some time with you without cameras. Now I'm blushing. I can't tell you how tempting this is, Amber, but I have to refuse, at least for one more night. I really need to get everything ready for tomorrow. She pouted. My loss. Anyway, I'll call you tomorrow so you know when to go back to the hotel. She then turned to get out of the car. Amber, I interrupted, I really thank you for everything you've done for me. I want you to know that I will take care of you, okay? She gave me another one of her megawatt smiles. I'd like to take care of you too, Robert. I can't believe you gave this up. I cursed myself as I watched her walk towards the elevator. After she left, I drove to a small restaurant I liked and grabbed some food and then headed to my office. Another night of eating at my desk while working. My first task was to edit the video we had just shot, nothing drastic, just enough to focus on the meat, so to speak. It took some time, but when I was satisfied, I made a copy that I could give to Baker. After that, I took out my law books and did a little review on contracts. I've been thinking a lot about what I want out of the fiasco of my marriage, and the last thing I needed was to ruin everything with a legal mistake. I worked on the contract for several hours. When everything was ready, I printed out several copies and put them in a legal-size envelope. Then I stood up and walked over to our old, uncomfortable office couch to rest my feet and rest. Now that I had finished everything I needed to do that evening, I had some time to think about my situation. While I was editing this video, I couldn't help but think about Renee and our marriage. I loved her so much, and I felt like she loved me just as much. Why did all this change? Looking back, it is clear that I was a disappointment to her. She wanted a husband with a prestigious title who earned a lot of money. I guess I wanted that too, but when things didn't work out at Allied, I still wanted to practice law. I looked around my small, run-down office. Even if it wasn't glamorous or particularly lucrative, it was mine, and I did what I wanted. Why can't Renee be happy for me? But even if I disappointed her, even if she wanted to end our marriage, that did not justify her trying to cheat me so much. It hurt me that she found another lover. It hurt me to know that she had deceived me for so long. But it wasn't enough for her to divorce me and leave. She had to try to arrange everything so that I would lose everything. Her infidelity was bad enough, but her treachery was unforgivable. And because of her treachery, my life was about to change dramatically. Regardless of whether I succeed in my little revolution tomorrow or not, my life will never be able to return to the way it was before. I'll burn my bridges to practice law hell. I'll burn my bridges to practice in Houston. Thank you very much, Renee. I lay down on my back, closed my eyes, and tried not to think about what was happening to my life. I must have fallen asleep because the next moment, Maddie was shaking me awake. Squire, is everything all right? Hi, Maddie, yes, everything is fine. I just worked late on our plan and probably fell asleep. Sitting down, I looked at her curiously. What are you doing here anyway? Today is Saturday, you shouldn't be at work. Her face dropped, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. I know, Squire. I just wanted to come and say goodbye to you in person. I jumped to my feet. Should I say goodbye? What are you talking about? I have to go back to school. Monday is the first day of classes. No, this cannot be. She shook her head sadly. I'm afraid so. But you can't go, Maddie. What will I do without you here? Now, tears began to stream down her cheeks. I thought I would be glad to go back to school. But the thing is, Squire, it was the best summer of my life. I mean, I learned so much from you and was involved in so much excitement. A slight smile appeared on her lips. My classmates will be so jealous when they find out about my summer internship. Stunned by the thought of her leaving, I stood up. In hindsight, I knew that she would, of course, return to school. But so much happened, and we became such a good team that I completely forgot about it. Maddie, I don't know what to say. If it helps, I'll write you the best recommendation an intern has ever received. I'll do anything for you. I just wish you wouldn't leave. She rushed towards me and hugged me tightly. I will never forget you, Squire. She kissed me on the cheek, then turned and rushed to the door before I could say a word. I heard her cry, and honestly, I wanted to cry too. At that moment, my mobile phone rang, and looking at the display, I saw that it was Amber. I hope you're ready, she said quietly, as if strangers were nearby. The meeting will be adjourned in the next half hour, so you'd better get here as soon as possible. Thank you, Amber, I said grimly. I'll be there now. When I stepped out of the hotel elevator on the 21st floor, Amber rushed to greet me. She was out of breath. You just did it. She pointed to the double doors behind her. He should be out of there any minute. Thank you, Amber. Now you need to make sure that you are not visible. Good luck, she whispered and kissed me on the cheek before disappearing. Looking around, I saw that the doors to the conference room opened and Roger Baker appeared, accompanied by several assistants to whom he gave orders. That's all. I walked up and blocked his path. Hello, Mr. Baker. He raised his head in fear, and his assistants moved uncertainly. Then his face lit up with recognition. Do I know you? You are Renee Wilson's husband, aren't you? I nodded. You have a good memory for faces. He smiled faintly. What can I do for you, young man? Actually, I just wanted to warn you that on Monday, I'm going to file a lawsuit against your company that will ruin its reputation for years to come. The young people crowded around let out a collective sigh, but Baker's face only twisted into a grin. Really, Mr. Wilson? On what basis can you sue us? Let's start with conspiracy to defraud, legal malpractice, misuse of client funds, embezzlement, extortion, blackmail, violation of the Texas Bar Association Code of Conduct. Should I continue? Amid the murmurs of his men, Baker shook his head dismissively. Talk is cheap, young man. If you want to make a fool of yourself, we will see you in court. I'm losing him. Don't you even want to see evidence of my accusations? I handed over a flash drive with a copy of our video. Do you know what this is? His vanity took over. I'm not as computer illiterate as you think. I know what a flash drive is. Then if any of your people here have a laptop, you can look at what I have and make your own judgment. He waved his hand, and the assistant quickly handed him the laptop. Then he extended his hand to me for the flash drive. Well, I looked around at his surroundings. With all due respect to your colleagues, I think you'll want to look at this in private. He looked at me coldly, then made a decision. Find me a free room, he ordered to no one in particular, and the group scattered like cockroaches caught in the light. After a minute or two, one of them opened the door and called his boss. The white-haired lawyer imperiously headed in that direction, and I hurried after him. If this is some kind of joke, sir, you will regret it. But I had already inserted the flash drive and clicked on the icon. As the image filled the screen and began to play, his threat was cut off mid-sentence. I let the video play, then I reached up and paused it. I think you recognize my wife, Renee Wilson, although I hope you haven't seen her like this before. He didn't say anything, but didn't take his eyes off the screen. This man is, of course, one of your junior partners, Vance Hoffmeister. As you can see, he and my wife have a fairly close relationship. Baker was still silent. I think I should point out a couple of things about Mr. Baum Hoffmeister. The first is that he is Renee's boss at your firm, which is a clear violation of the B&V Code of Conduct. Second, if I understand correctly, Mr. Piley Hoffmeister is also your niece's husband. The old man could not hide his disgust. This cheating bastard, Mr. Baker, unless you wish otherwise, I will spare you the next half hour of events in this video. However, if you have any doubts, I can assure you that they are involved in every detail. He shook his head. I know what it is. Then let's get to the pardon, the expression, the real meat of what you're about to see. But first, let me point out that two of your lawyers are having fun in a room your firm has booked at this very hotel. I reached over to restart the video, and the scene moved forward to where they began discussing a plan to involve me in adultery. I saw Baker frown, then he suddenly looked up at me. What was there about embezzlement? I stopped playback. I regret to inform you that Amber Tompkins, an employee of your administrative staff, managed to embezzle almost $50,000 from an escrow account managed by your firm. These two found out about this and blackmailed her, trying to seduce me. Watching Baker's face, I couldn't understand what outraged him more, blackmail or embezzlement. I reached for the keyboard again. There's one more piece that I think you'll want to watch. On the screen, my wife looked at her lover. So what about you? How soon can you get rid of your sanctimonious small wives? We already talked about this, Renee. I can't do anything while Baker's gone. But I do know that the old fart told the senior partners that he was going to retire after Christmas. I just need to wait until the new year, then I can apply too. The timing will be perfect, baby. By then, your marriage will be ancient history, and when I apply, we will be able to see each other freely in public. We'll have a whirlwind romance, and we'll get married in no time, you'll see. Okay, she sighed, but it's so hard to wait. And speaking of difficulties, I stopped the video. You have a good pair of workers, sir, and what I find particularly intriguing about this last segment is that I understand that your niece is pregnant. It looks like your sister's grandson will grow up without a father in her life. Staring at the screen, he became visibly angry. After a minute or two, he regained his composure and turned to me. You know that this video cannot be accepted in court. I smiled at him. That's for the judge to decide, isn't it? But he will see it, and others will see it, and the rumor will spread just like that. For that matter, we live in an age where privacy is dead. You know, it's only a matter of time before it hits the internet. I sighed, mockingly compassionate. Just think about what it would do to your firm's reputation if its lawyers conspired to blackmail you. Think about how your clients will feel knowing that the administrator can rob their escrow accounts at will. For that matter, think about how your niece will feel, especially during this vital last trimester of her pregnancy. He leaned against the table and folded his arms across his chest. As you want, sir. How long do you want it all to go? I opened the envelope I was holding in my hands, took out 2 copies of the contract I had prepared, and handed it to him. I think you'll find that covers it all. He shook his head sourly and began to read. $5 million. If you continue reading, you will see that it is $5 million less taxes. It's outrageous. I don't think so at all. Obviously, after this is all over, I will no longer be able to practice law in Houston. You are simply covering the current cost of potential earnings that I would have to give up. Besides, from what I've heard, this amount isn't that far off from what a senior partner at your firm makes in a year. He chuckled, but continued reading. After a minute, he raised his head with a puzzled expression on his face. You don't want to get your money within 3 months. I want to make sure they don't enter into a divorce agreement. He didn't say anything, but it seemed to me that a smile flashed on his face. The next paragraph caught his attention. Amnesty for Tompkins. Why do you want to protect her? She took these funds only because her sister needed surgery. Moreover, she completely covered them before Renee and Vance discovered her waste. I think she deserves a little compassion. He sighed, shook his head, and continued reading. Finally, he looked up at me again. You know, I can't sign anything now. I need another lawyer to look at it. I laughed in his face. The most famous lawyer in Houston, the head of Baker, Norton, and Vinson, cannot review a simple contract. Look, either you sign now or I'm turning this video over to the Houston Chronicle. This is blackmail, young man. No, sir, these are negotiations. He stared at me for a moment, then reached for his pen. If you break this non-disclosure agreement, you will face severe retribution, he snapped. It is also in my interests to remain silent about all this, sir. He shook his head in disgust, then signed and dated both copies. When he finished, he handed me my copy. To my surprise, he nodded at me. You know, I would do the same if I were you. Wow, I didn't expect it. Then, a sly expression appeared on his face. I think it's time for me to have a little chat with Renee and Vance. Want to stay and watch? I think you deserve it. I would really like that, I answered gloomily. He walked to the door and pulled it open, startling the people crowded outside. I want to see Hoffmeister and Wilson here now. The small crowd dispersed again. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and Renee and Vance entered. Did you want to see us, Mr. Baker? Renee asked. Then she noticed me. Robert, what are you doing here? Baker intervened. Miss Wilson, I watched you during the negotiations this week, and I must say that you did a good job for us. She beamed at the compliment. Well, thank you, sir. But he wasn't finished. So you can appreciate my disappointment that I have to fire you for good reason. What? She sighed. Why? Baker gestured to me. Your husband told me several interesting things about your marriage. I saw her thinking. Sir, everything he told you is a lie. Robert and I are in the process of getting a divorce. He will say anything to make me look bad. Baker smiled slyly. I rely not on his words, Miss Wilson, but on your own. With these words, he unfolded the laptop and clicked on the icon. As the image of the two lovers began to play, Renee and Vance gasped. How the hell? Vance cursed as Renee reached to close the laptop. But Baker's gesture stopped her. Let's watch and listen a little more, okay? As the guilty couple looked on in horror, Baker allowed my edited version to be reproduced in full, including a discussion of their extortion scheme. Baker slammed his laptop shut. I said you were a good lawyer, Miss Wilson. Would you like to tell me how many laws, rules, codes, and ethics you admit to breaking in this video? But Mr. Baker, that's enough, he snapped. Then he walked over and opened the door. Mr. Dos Rosen, he called, gesturing to one of his assistants. Show Miss Wilson into the office and stay with her while she vacates her desk. She is only allowed to remove personal items, no folders, no electronic equipment, no papers. Inspect everything, then take her out of the building. Did you understand? The man shuddered. Yes, sir. Renee managed to cast a shocked glance over her shoulder at Vance before she disappeared from view. All this time, Hoffmeister stayed in the corner of the room, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. This was not enough. Baker turned his attention to the cowardly man. Under other circumstances, Hoffmeister, you would already be outside the door with your mistress. But I love my sister and her daughter, and I'm not going to give up on the father of her unborn child, no matter what piece of shit you are. However, I am removing you from your position as a partner, effective today. Instead, I am appointing you as my personal assistant at large. I'm going to send you somewhere where you're less likely to be seduced by the next lady who comes into your sight. Now get out of my sight and go home to your wife. And Vance, treat her like a queen, got it? Yes, sir, he squeaked and ran out of the room. Baker sank into his chair and turned to me. Well, Mr. Wilson, are you satisfied? Yes, sir, satisfied, I told him. Fine. Then get out of here. I need to call my partners and not retire. Obviously, the dogs have taken over this place, and I need to clean up the dog shit. He tilted his head and looked at me appraisingly. You know, maybe I hired the wrong Wilson. Then his face hardened, and he stared at me angrily. That being said, I would prefer never to see your face again. I chuckled and headed towards the door, mutually confident. Then I walked away, clutching my copy of the contract tightly in my hand. On the Monday after the big fight at Alessandra's, I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. Baker surprised me by arranging for a quick hearing before a sympathetic judge. I think he didn't want it to drag on and become public knowledge. Renee did not contest the divorce. She saw the video of me filming Vance, and she didn't want it shown in court. Of course, I was bound by a non-disclosure agreement, but she didn't know about my deal with Baker. I didn't enlighten her. Shortly after filing the application, she called me and asked if there was any way I could forgive her. Even if I could forget your betrayal, I will never be able to forgive your betrayal, I told her. She didn't try to argue further. Perhaps it helped that I offered her a direct property settlement. You take yours, I take mine. We divide everything that is jointly owned. I could try to punish her, but I didn't want her to fight me and find that I couldn't use the video against her. She chose to accept my deal and take the loss. Good deliverance. We listed our house for sale and priced it so it would sell quickly. That's what happened, and although we didn't make any money on the sale, at least it was out of our hands. Another task completed, another connection between us broken. While I waited for the divorce to become final, I spent time winding down my law practice. I dealt with some clients in the remaining time, others I transferred to another lawyer I knew who was trying to get out on his own. While all this was going on, I spent a lot of time thinking about my life and my future. There was no realistic chance that I would be able to practice law in Houston again. Having an enemy as powerful as Roger Baker made me anathema to every other firm in town. An attempt to revive my own legal practice also made no sense. Likewise, returning to the oil industry was not an option. As I told Renee, the business has evolved, my experience has become outdated, and my contacts have changed. The good news was that, thanks to the settlement with Baker, I didn't have to worry about work for the foreseeable future. So I decided to leave hot, humid Houston for a long vacation on the beach, cooled by the ocean breeze. After a little research, I chose the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. Why not lie on the beach and think about your future at your leisure? These plans were supposed to make me happy, but instead, I ended up depressed. Actually, come to think of it, I've been depressed ever since the Big Baker Showdown. Most people would like to be in my place. Why the hell don't you do this? Part of the problem, I knew, was the end of my marriage. I didn't miss Renee, she very effectively destroyed any feelings I ever had for her. But I always saw myself with a wife and family, and I couldn't help but mourn the loss of that way of life. And that wasn't all I lost. After working my ass off to finish law school and then open my own firm, it was painful to forget about practicing law. Besides, I was leaving the city where I had spent the last 10 years of my life, and there was a good chance I would never return. With all these big changes in my life, I had good reason to feel overwhelmed. But I knew that it was not just like that. Something was still missing. I looked at the photos of Costa Rica again. It's so beautiful, so many interesting things. I just wish I had someone to share this with. And then it dawned on me, it's not just about Costa Rica. I don't want to start my new life alone. I want to share it with someone special. The moment I realized this, I knew exactly who I needed and immediately fidgeted in place. What if she doesn't need me? Why would she drop everything and leave with me? What will I do if she refuses me? I sat and argued with myself, 1 minute trying to work up the courage to ask, and the next I answered myself. I've taken risks before in my life, I can do it again. Yes, for example, changing professions mid-career. It was a big risk, and it didn't pay off, did it? But it failed, for reasons beyond my control. Maybe so, but the adventure still failed. What about starting your own law practice? This was another big risk, and it didn't pay off either. This is true. I knew the odds were stacked against me, but I was too stubborn to admit it. In this case, everything was on my conscience. But not all of my adventures were unsuccessful. When I came across Renee's little scheme to frame me for cheating, I decided to turn it around. It paid off handsomely. Yes, but I'm damn lucky. Who said luck can't be good sometimes? Confronting Baker took courage, but I went for it and hit the jackpot. So why not roll the dice again, especially for something so important? I made my decision and walked to my car. I waited outside the Houston Hobby ticket area, standing on the terrazzo left over from the old airport. As I looked around anxiously, a woman's voice called, "Robert, is that you?" I turned to see Mary Margaret Olson hurrying down the hall towards me as fast as her tight skirt would allow. "I'm so glad I met you," she sighed as she walked up to me and took my hand. She looked down at my bag. "Are you going to leave town?" I nodded. "Yes, I've already finished everything here and am leaving for a long vacation. I'm glad for you, everyone needs it. Occasionally, leave. I wouldn't mind doing this myself." I wasn't sure if she was hinting at this, so I didn't say anything. "I was sorry to hear about you and Renee," she continued. Her facial expression did not express any sadness. "It's not worth it. Everything was for the better, I assure you." "I understand," she nodded. She looked away for a moment. "You know, she told me that she cheated on you. Is it true?" I thought for a moment. Was this before or after you and I had lunch together? Now she was confused. "Ugh. Why didn't you warn me?" She shrugged helplessly. "I couldn't do it. She's my best friend." "I thought I was your friend too." She questioned my tone, then continued. "I talked to her a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't help myself." "And how does she feel?" "Not very good. No law firm in town would hire her, so she decided to return home to McAllen and practice on her own." I didn't say a word. The look on Mary Margaret's face told me she understood the irony perfectly. But I was still thinking about our little meeting in the summer. "Tell me something, Mary Margaret. Why did you want to have lunch with me?" Her smile became cutesy. "I've always liked you, Robert. I thought that if things don't work out between you and Renee, I'd throw my hat into the ring early." She looked down at my bag. "You know, I could change my travel plans if you want a little company." I looked at her coldly. "Sorry, I already asked someone who cares more about my well-being. She winced, but before she could say anything, I raised my head. Actually, she's already on her way. Mary Margaret looked where I was pointing and her eyes widened. She ran down the corridor. Noticing me, she threw her bag and ran. A moment later, she hugged me so tightly that it was difficult to breathe. "Squire," she squeaked joyfully. Then she kissed me and I couldn't breathe. While I hugged her, one thought did not leave my mind. Thank God I went for it. 2 days earlier, Tohen, I finally decided to take the plunge. I took my car keys and drove to the University of Houston. Several years passed, but I still remembered the road. But even as I drove northwest on I-45, I still struggled with my insecurities. Where did you even get the idea that she was interested in you? She never said anything, and she hasn't tried to contact you since she went back to law school. Besides, she probably has a boyfriend. Even if you don't, you're almost 10 years older. Why does she need you? Despite my anxiety, I exited the freeway onto Elgin, drove under the Alvin Freeway, and found a parking spot near the law center. Then I nervously walked into the main entrance and asked the first student I saw if she knew Madison Armstrong. "Everyone knows Maddie," she told me. "She's probably in a legal writing class right now. After this, she usually goes to the community. If you wait there, you'll probably see her." I found the Commons and sat in a chair, watching the young would-be lawyers milling around, chatting, checking their phones, or ordering food from the little subway in one corner of the room. As I sat there, I gradually became aware that I was attracting sidelong glances, and I began to feel a little paranoid. What's happening? Do I look like a stalker or something? Is my fly unzipped? As I became increasingly uneasy, a young woman abruptly approached me. "Are you a squire?" she demanded. No, that is, yes, that is." She crossed her arms and glared at me, then turned on her heel and walked away before I could say anything else. What the hell was that? The room began to fill with students, and many of them were now lining the walls. They seemed to be watching me, and I seriously thought about breaking through to the exit. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the crowd as people at the back of the room moved away. Then Maddie came into the room and hesitantly approached me. She looked terrible. Her hair was disheveled, there were bags under her eyes, and her clothes seemed to be hanging off her. When I stood up and took a step towards her, she pulled back as if in fear. I didn't want to talk in public, but it seemed like I had no choice. However, before I could speak, she asked, "What are you doing here, Squire?" in such a low voice that I could barely hear her. "Maddie, Renee and I are now divorced. We sold our house, and I'm planning to move out of town. But I wanted to see you before I left." There was a collective sigh from the students watching us, and then an angry buzz filled the room. Tears started running down Maddie's face. "I'm doing everything wrong," I thought. "You don't understand, Maddie. I saw Baker and negotiated a settlement with him. I can't talk about it, but I closed my law office." She wrapped her arms around her torso, protecting herself from what was about to happen. Why didn't I plan what I wanted to say? I scolded myself. I know I'm doing everything wrong, but I'm trying to ask, can you come with me? "What?" she asked subtly. I shook my head in despair. "I know it's crazy, but I'm trying to ask if we could go away together, you and me." I shrugged helplessly. "I've been so miserable since you left, and I just thought that maybe." She whispered something that I couldn't understand. I looked at her uncertainty. "What did you say?" "Yes, Squire, I said yes," she said loudly, and then hugged me. She pulled back to look at me. "I thought I would never see you again, and it was killing me." The roar could still be heard and was difficult to hear. I looked around and realized that all the students were cheering and clapping. "I was afraid that you had changed your mind," I said, hugging her at the airport. "Are you kidding? I have been absolutely miserable since returning to law school. My grades went to hell, I lost weight, everyone in my class knew what was wrong with me." She looked up at me with shining eyes. "Then, when someone told me that you were waiting for me in the community, I thought I was dreaming, but I didn't know whether it was a good dream or a nightmare. When you asked me to go with you, I realized that my good dream had come true. I was unhappy too, Maddie, and I couldn't understand why. At first, I thought it was because of the divorce and all the crap that comes with it, but eventually I realized how much I miss you in my life. Well, it was time, she cursed. With mocking seriousness. Mary Margaret had been watching us with a depressed expression, and now she cleared her throat to get my attention. Well, it looks like I'm the third wheel here. Good luck, Robert, she said hoarsely and hurried away. Maddie stepped back a little to watch her leave, then looked at me out of the corner of her eye. Who was that? I chuckled. Don't you remember? It was Mary Margaret Olson, Renee's best friend. She came to have dinner with me in the summer. Oh yes, now I remember her. Miss Hungry Eyes. She looked at me suspiciously. What was she doing here? Don't be jealous, she just happened to run into me. And don't worry, I made it clear that I'm not interested in her. Maddie grabbed my hand and pulled me tightly towards her. Okay, and don't forget about it. But before she left, she told me some interesting news about my ex-wife. After she was fired from Baker Norton, no law firm in town wanted to hire her. So Mary Margaret said Renee was returning to her hometown to hang out at her storefront and practice on her own. Maddie laughed. Wow, let's talk about karma. Well, it will do her good after what she tried to do to you. Suddenly, she let go of my hand and pulled back in alarm. My bag, I left my bag there. I laughed as I watched her gracefully run back down the hallway to pick it up. Definitely an athlete, I thought joyfully. Then, hand in hand, we headed to the boarding gate. As we approached the check-in counter, I reached into my pocket to hand her her ticket. That reminds me. I have something else for you, I told her and handed her the check. What is this? She asked. This is your salary for this summer. She looked at him, then at me, confused. Squire, you don't owe me anything for this summer. I agreed to work just like that. I couldn't afford to pay you last summer, but now I definitely can, so it would be wrong not to. I then handed her the second check, and her eyes widened when she saw the amount. I don't understand, what is this for? You told me you were going to pay off your student loans so you could work for me. Now, that should be enough to pay off your law school debt. She stared at me in confusion, then her voice became angry. Wait a minute, are you trying to buy me? I agreed to go with you not because I need money. I led her to a couple of empty seats and sat down next to her. You took a leave of absence from law school to come with me. The least I can do is fix the situation so you aren't saddled with a ton of student loans. She started to protest, but I put my fingers to her lips. Listen, Maddie, all I want is for us to be happy together, for us to enjoy each other without any worries. I'm not trying to buy you, Maddie, I'm just trying to buy a little peace of mind for both of us, that's all. But where did all this money come from? Remember I told you that I made an agreement with old Baker the day you came to say goodbye? Now, it was a very good agreement. How good? I lowered my voice. Between you and me, I received $5 million tax-free in exchange for not suing the company and publicly disgracing them. Her mouth dropped open. You can't tell anyone anything because I signed a non-disclosure agreement. But I can definitely afford to give you these checks, and we can enjoy each other for a long time without worrying about money. She looked at me for a moment longer, then her frown disappeared and she hugged me again. That's all I want too, Squire, to be with you. She looked a little embarrassed. Actually, I've wanted this for a long time. You know, I think I started falling in love with you the first week I started working at your company. I didn't realize it at first, but I started to have feelings for you too. I kept trying to resist because of Renee. I grinned. I think this problem has solved itself. She kissed me again, and we sat there until I looked at the time. Hand in hand, we walked to the reception desk. The flight attendant at the counter smiled as she checked us off her list. In a few minutes, you lovebirds will be able to start landing, she told us. As we stood and waited, Maddie looked at me curiously. You told me about Renee, but what happened to Hoffmeister? Do you know anything about him? In general, yes. After the divorce, I had to contact old man Baker to arrange for a company check to be deposited into my account. When I did, I asked him about Vance. Honestly, I think he wanted to tell someone what he did to Hoffmeister. Anyway, he said Vance was doing research for a firm in the Aleutian Islands. He also said that he plans to bring the guy home when it's time for his wife to give birth. But once mother and child are safely out of the hospital, Hoffmeister will head on to his next assignment, to Kazakhstan, not far from Siberian borders. Maddie winced. Wow, that's a vindictive old man. Not that I feel sorry for Hoffmeister. At that moment, the loudspeaker announced that our flight was ready to board, and Maddie and I began to walk up the ramp together. Steward walked us to our first-class seats and stowed our bags. He then brought us each a glass of champagne while we waited for the other passengers to board. Maddie took a sip and sighed. I can get used to such travel as long as you sit next to me. Then she leaned on the armrest and rested her head on my shoulder. Seeing her so happy made me feel better than I had in years. Then she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't understand. You didn't mention Amber what happened to her? Well, since she helped us so much as part of the settlement, I got Baker to agree not to fire her. And he kept his word. She still works for the company, but they keep her on a short leash. Maddie gave me another funny look. You know, if you were going to ask someone to leave with you like that, I would think it would be her. I mean, she's so beautiful and everything. I shook my head and smiled. Maddie, you're the one who makes me happy, not Amber. And unlike her, you are beautiful both inside and out. She hugged me tightly again. Good answer, Squire. Besides, I added, Baker told me something very interesting about Amber. For example, do you know that she took money so that her sister could have an operation? Yes. Well, Baker told me that Amber doesn't have a sister, and she never paid the money back. Later that day, I put my hand on Maddie's shoulder, and we walked down to the water's edge. That's why I wanted to come to Costa Rica. It's wonderful. I'm so glad we're here. But it wouldn't be half as wonderful if you weren't here with me, Maddie. She pulled me even tighter and laid her head on my shoulder. We stood in silence, watching the sun disappear into the Pacific Ocean. Then she timidly looked up at me. Do you remember what we saw on the video in Houston, Squire? Can we go back to the villa and try some of this? Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.